all. Okay. Everybody there? Everybody seems to be in. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Okay, well, bonjour tout le monde. I hope everyone has something bubbly to toast Champagne Charlie. I have my bottle. It's a little early, so I won't. So I'd like to welcome you to the Alliance Française of Pasadena's discussion with Don and Petie Kladstrup, the authors of Champagne Charlie. Just to give you a little background, the Kladstrups are former journalists who now live in Paris. Don was a correspondent with CBS and ABC News from 1978 to 1994 and has won 3 Emmys, 2 DuPont Columbia Awards, and several overseas press awards, and a National Association of Black Journalists Awards. Petie was a reporter for several Midwestern papers, the assistant to the UN ambassador to UNESCO, and she's won an Overseas Press Club award as well. In addition to Champagne Charlie, the subject of this morning's presentation, the Kladstrups are also authors of 2 other books, which I highly recommend. One is Wine and War, The French, the Nazis, and the Battle of France's Greatest Treasures. And the second book is Champagne, How the World's Most Glamorous Wine Triumphed Over War and Hard Times. They have appeared on NPR several times to discuss their books, and I will also post those links in the chat box in case you're interested in hearing those interviews. The Kladstrups have put together a presentation for us, and then we'll follow with a Q&A. When we get to the Q&A part, you can either put your questions in the chat box or unmute yourself. So for purposes of this, we're going to mute everybody so we don't get any feedback. So at this point, Don and Petie, welcome. And we're so pleased you could join us. And how's the weather at your home in Paris? How is April in Paris treating you?
Well, keep in mind, April in Paris is written in a minor key. And
okay, what did I do? Did I?
Sorry, Terry, you need to unmute them.
Oh, okay. I thought oh dear, what did I do? I am so sorry.
all right, do we need to start again?
Yes, maybe, because I somehow think I muted you. Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, first of all, thank you very much, Terry. We're delighted to be here, and we really enjoyed getting the invitation from Dan originally, and seeing you guys tonight from night our time anyway. And as I said, it's a kind of cool and rainy April after a beautiful March, but you know, Paris is always beautiful, so we have no complaints at all.
None whatsoever. So let's get right to the book, and this is the cover of the book that we've recently written about Charles Heidsieck, the man who became famously known as Champagne Charlie. And as you can see, he strikes a rather he is a rather striking figure. He had black wavy hair, had a mustache, sported a goatee, and he stood 6'3". In other words, he was a big guy. He was hard to miss. And but the thing is, I think the most striking fact about him is that he was a man far ahead of his time. He was determined to make a name for himself, for his champagne house. And between the years of 1852 and 1861, he made 4 trips to the United States to accomplish all of that. But he was also a reckless person. Even though he was a man far ahead of his time, far ahead, well, he was working long before advertising, the days of mass marketing. He was the first person who really felt that it was important to put a human face on the product that he was trying to sell. And he did this. He did this really successfully. But he was also a fellow who was inclined to take chances, big risks. And as it turned out, it nearly cost him his life. Anyway, we'll get into that, but before we do, let us just talk a little bit about champagne in general. And hold on, someone is ringing the doorbell, and we'll be right back.
You know, Don and I had a discussion before this program started saying, should we put up a do not disturb sign? And Don said, nobody comes to the door at this hour.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will go back to talking a little bit about a background about champagne itself before we get into the specifics of Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, as you all know, champagne is much more than just a wine. It's the universal symbol of good times and celebration for baptisms, birthdays, spring weddings, spring crowds at car rallies. You name it, and champagne is there. I mean, all you have to do is practically say the word champagne, and it almost practically brings a smile. Just ask this guy, and let's see. Why doesn't our slideshow work?
Well, we'll find out. Will you hold on a moment, and we will get it going here?
No.
I think. Let's try it now and see if it works. There we go.
Okay, there we go. As I said, you know, just saying the word champagne brings a smile, and nobody knows that better than Casanova. He called champagne the essential equipment for seduction.
And here we have Coco Chanel, a great designer, who said she only drank it on 2 occasions, when she was in love and when she wasn't. Madame de Pompadour said, it's the only wine that a woman can drink, and that it leaves her more beautiful after she's drunk it. But now Betty Davis was, you know, another grande dame who certainly had a way with words. She said, you know, you should never say anything bad about dead people. You should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good. But she also said, there is a time in every woman's life when the only thing that helps is a glass of champagne.
Anyway, the hype and the hyperbole go on and on. Napoleon, for instance, he once said, in victory, you deserve it. In defeat, you need it. Winston Churchill claimed that it made his wits more nimble. In World War II, he reminded his countrymen, remember, it's not just France we're fighting for, it's also champagne.
Yeah, but here's probably the woman who said the thing we like best about champagne. This is Lily Bollinger, one of Champagne's truly grandes dames. And she said, I drink champagne when I'm happy and when I'm sad. Sometimes I drink it when alone. In company, I consider it compulsory. I sip a little if I'm hungry. Otherwise, I don't touch it, unless I'm thirsty, of course.
You know, champagne has been a tradition for such a long time that one English poet even suggested that Adam may have celebrated with it in the first New Year's Eve. That was the title of a poem that this poet wrote. And indulge us now, because let us recite it. The man, the one and only one, first gentleman on earth, said, how about a little fun? Come, let us have some mirth. To some swell nightclub we must roam, said he, and drink champagne.
But she said, we can stay at home and still be raising Cain.
You get the picture. But here is another one. This is Reims, the city of Reims in Champagne, which was nearly destroyed in World War I. What most people don't realize, though, is that this part of France, which gave birth to the wine that symbolizes good times and celebration, has probably experienced more suffering and been drenched with more blood than nearly any other place on earth. Consider this: the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, the Wars of Spanish Succession, a vicious civil war called the Fronde. All of those were fought entirely or perhaps partially in Champagne. And even before that, the whole region was besieged by wild tribes from the east. And after them came the Romans. And let's not forget 2 world wars. So, you know, from time immemorial, one historian said, Champagne has suffered an overdose of invasions.
Yeah, World War I was particularly destructive. The whole city of Reims experienced more than 1,000 consecutive days of bombing. The entire city had to move underground into the crayères, the cobbs underneath the city where champagne is made. But during the war, they became homes to everybody. There were schools, churches, hospitals, the city council met there, babies were born there. Absolutely everything you can imagine happened underground. And of course, champagne was made at the same time.
Yeah, but while it, you know, it may seem like ancient history, well, the past is very much alive. This is what they're still digging up in Champagne by a local bomb squad. Shells that were fired on the region against the French in World War I. Many of those shells that you're looking at are still leaking poisons, seeping into the earth and rendering the ground, well, helpless in terms of growing anything. There are vast portions of Champagne in which, you know, just absolutely nothing is going to grow. Yeah. So anyway, much of that history was described in another book that we wrote about Champagne, which Terry mentioned. Champagne, how the world's most glamorous wine triumphed over war and hard times. And it was while researching that book that we first came in touch with Charles Heidsieck, with Champagne Charlie.
I'm going to interrupt Don here a minute just to say that in looking at that, at those bombs, there is, he said, still being dug up in Champagne today, in the vineyards, in farmyards, in people's gardens. They're still finding them, and they collect them over a period of time. They have a storage area, and Don did a story on this for, I can't remember, ABC or CBS. And they go out once every few months or every year, depending on how it's necessary, and explode these because they remain incredibly dangerous. And as he said, the land has been so poisoned in certain areas that even now, more than 100 years after World War I, they still don't plant vines there or anything else. And certainly whole villages disappeared and have never come back. But so when you see these pictures, these are, well, yesterday type photos.
Yeah, but it was immersing ourselves, you know, in what happened in Champagne and in all of its history. That, as I say, we first came across Charles Heidsieck, that dashing young Frenchman who went off to America in 1852 to seek his fortune. He felt that, you know, this was the only way that he could make a name for himself and for his Champagne house. Trying to do the same thing in Champagne was impossible because the area was just saturated.
Europe was, he felt, saturated with all the other Champagne houses. Terry mentioned the Champagne tastings that will have 138 different champagnes at them. That gives you an idea of the magnitude of the amount of champagne that is made and is distributed. But even in the 1850s, 1860s, it covered all of Europe. So Heidsieck, who was a man with a very adventurous spirit, felt that in order to really make his own name, he had to find another place. And he was also a bit under the shadow of his father, who died when he was very young, but who had been a very, very glamorous figure. And he made a name by riding from France and Champagne all the way to Moscow on a white stallion to try and beat Napoleon's armies to Moscow and sell champagne to the victor. This became a legend in Champagne, and throughout his childhood, Charles Heidsieck heard about his father and was told, if you emulate your father, you will find your own way. So when he came up upon the idea of going to America, he felt he'd found his way to make a splash as big as his father, even though people around him said, "You're crazy. It's a wild country. It's full of wild Indians. It's dangerous." And the people who are there, they only drink hard liquor, or maybe some cider or beer, but they're not really a country for champagne.
Yeah, but it was in that other book about Champagne that we wrote, as I say, that we first came across the story of Charles Heidsieck. We devoted 6 pages to his story. And one reader contacted us and said, "Isn't there more to the story?" Well, we certainly thought so. And that's why we ended up writing the book that we have, Champagne Charlie, the man who taught Americans to love champagne. And as Petie says, everybody thought he was absolutely nuts for trying to go off to America and do what he was about to do. But he could not be dissuaded. And
he was absolutely thrilled when he got to America. He was blown away by the scenery, by absolutely everything. And people were blown away by his champagne. Especially
the newspapers, which followed him everywhere. And he couldn't have been more ecstatic about the publicity, the great reviews of his champagne. Everybody seemed to think that his champagne is the best on the market, and buy it, get it as soon as you can. I mean, our Charlie is back again, screamed one headline. Another paper reported that soon Mr. Heidsieck will be heading west to hunt buffalo. Heidsieck, as I say, was thrilled, and in a letter to his wife, he said, I can't tell you how exciting this all is. I'm the most famous person in New York. Journalists follow me everywhere. It's sometimes a nuisance, but I suppose the more noise made about me, the more champagne we'll be able to sell. In some ways, I think he was maybe the first celebrity and certainly the start of celebrity culture. He was so popular and invited everywhere that, songs were written about him. And he responded in kind by finding that America was a place where he could express himself, and he was so excited that he said he wanted to see everything and travel every way possible to see the country. And so he did. He took a stagecoach across New York, a paddle wheel steamer on the Mississippi. He rode horseback and the iron horse across Ohio, Texas, Missouri. And everything impressed him. Everything thrilled him. Yeah, he was not just the consummate businessman. He seemed to be the consummate tourist too. Thrilled, as Petie says, with everything that he saw. But his heart was really with the South, especially New Orleans, where he noted that, hey, people really love to eat and drink. And, it seemed to be a surprise to him, they also speak French. So he was so excited by the response that he had that he immediately hired a sales agent and set up the beginnings of being able to export to America and sell champagne in America, with this agent out of New York helping, taking responsibility for it. Yeah, but if there was one thing that he did not like, it was the food. It was especially the bread. Why can't they make good bread in this country? He constantly complained. He also didn't like the turtle soup, which he said should be thrown into the Mississippi River. Anyway,
It's just something he discovered as he was traveling to the South. And as
Yeah.
Don said, this was the place that really caught his heart.
Yeah, but although he was an astute businessman, he was politically naive. His views on slavery, for instance, he looked at the cotton fields, all filled with slaves of all ages and sexes, and he was quoted as saying, "They seem happy and frequently burst into song. They live comfortably and lack for nothing. I think they are whipped more frequently in novels than in real life." Novels like Uncle Tom's Cabin.
That book came out during Heidsieck's first trip to America, and everyone was talking about it. It was a bestseller. So he did know about the book and its contents. He found that his own views about slavery began to change when he was taken to an actual slave market. He found it dehumanizing, and he was appalled that people could be treated like merchandise. He stood there and watched a cook sold for $1,000, a children's nurse for $750. And he said that all the while he was trying to conceal his emotions and remain impassive. But he said, what I witnessed was different from the language which was gripping my heart.
Well, something else that was gripping his heart was the great fear that his, excuse me, that his champagne business was about to go broke and face bankruptcy, because news came in, letters from his wife, that said that, they weren't getting paid for their champagne, or they were, at the very least, getting shortchanged. And Heidsieck went back to New York, confronted the agent, said, "Why aren't you paying me?" And the agent replied, "There's a war going on. Nobody's paying me. I'm not going to pay you." And that's that. And no amount of pleas from Heidsieck changed the agent's mind. And so with that, Heidsieck decided that he'd have to go south, head back toward New Orleans, meet up with as many of his good friends there as possible, many of whom owned plantations, and just, pray that somehow they would come through and pay him what they have, bought. But
unfortunately, they didn't have any money. What they did have was cotton. So Heidsieck conceived the idea of being paid in cotton for his champagne, and then putting the cotton onto ships and sending it back to France, where they were dying for cotton because their mills were standing idle with the Civil War raging. He figured that even if one of the two ships he hired got through, it would more than cover his debts and keep his business afloat. So he began collecting the cotton. The port of Mobile was still open. So it was from Mobile that he was sending the two ships back to France full of cotton. However, both of them were fired on and sunk by Union forces.
And this was about the time that Heidsieck realized it was no longer safe for him to remain in the United States, that he had done just about all he could to save his business. And now it was time to skedaddle, hopefully get a quick boat to either Havana or to Mexico, and from there get onto a ship that would get him back home. Easier said than done, though.
Yeah, he decided he would make one last trip from Mobile to New Orleans to collect some money and to see if there was any mail from home. So he got on through some connections with the people, with the boats that were going along the shore, which said they couldn't take passengers. They were only allowed to carry vital supplies into New Orleans. Mm-hmm. He signed on, however, as a barman, said he would run the bar, the snack bar, whatever, mm-hmm. if they would carry him to New Orleans so he could do this. At the same time, his friend in Mobile, who was the consul for France, said, if you're going, could you please take this diplomatic pouch to the consul in New Orleans?
He agreed, and it was a big mistake because the diplomatic pouch contained a number of letters, documents from various European countries, especially France, which pretty much indicated that, they supported the Confederacy and were doing all they could to help the Confederacy win the war, even though the countries were technically neutral. Anyway, on his last trip, on Heidsieck's last trip to New Orleans, soldiers confronted him and informed him that he was supposed to appear at this fellow's office, General Benjamin Butler. His nickname was the Beast, and Butler was a xenophobe. He hated the French. He referred to them as dogs, and he was convinced after he opened the diplomatic pouch, this is what it looked like. Anyway, he was convinced that Heidsieck was a spy for the Confederacy, and he was convinced of this because one of the letters in that pouch was from the French foreign minister, which stated unequivocally that France was making uniforms for the South. And Heidsieck said, look, I didn't know what was in the pouch. I had no idea. I was just doing this as a favor for the French consul of Mobile. The French consul of New Orleans also came to Heidsieck's support and said, look, he's innocent. Please, you should not be holding him. And Butler replied, I don't care a whit about Heidsieck or any of this.
His language was more colorful than that, but okay.
Yeah. Well, the French consul of New Orleans said, look, if you continue to hold him, if you don't let him go, I'm going to contact or inform the Emperor Napoleon III. To which Butler said, I don't give a shit about the Emperor. He's a French dog, just like all the others. And, I'm going to place Heidsieck under arrest. I'm going to put him on trial. And if found guilty, I'll hang him as a spy.
And in fact, this is one of the things we spend some time on in the book, talking about the effects of Heidsieck's time in prison, because he was transported out to Fort Jackson in what was labeled as the worst place in Louisiana and held there, where they didn't have any need for guards because there were alligators and snakes, also yellow fever. And when the water rose, the alligators came towards the windows with their jaws snapping. So the prisoners had to throw rocks, etc., into the jaws to chase them off. But in any event, Heidsieck became very ill during this time.
Yeah, he was held in prison, held at Jackson for between 4 and 5 months. The only way that he was finally released was a letter writing campaign. Heidsieck's wife petitioned Napoleon III and the Empress. Letters were written to Washington pleading for his release. And finally, the Lincoln administration decided, look, we have a war going on. The last thing we need is a giant diplomatic flame up that interrupts everything. We don't have time to deal with this. And so orders came down to free Heidsieck, which infuriated Benjamin Butler. Butler said, the guy was guilty as sin. I wanted to put him on trial, try him as a spy, and if found guilty, hang him as a spy. He was just absolutely furious and beside himself. But Heidsieck, was finally released in terrible health and slowly made his way back up to New York, where he, tried to recover.
When he was finally feeling better, he just realized that General Butler had not forgotten him, nor had General Butler changed his mind about him, because as Heidsieck walked down the hall of his hotel, 2 shots flew by his ear. They were fired by assassins hired by General Butler. So as you can imagine, Heidsieck was on the next ship back to France.
Yeah, but his reputation was in tatters. I mean, after all the publicity of his imprisonment and that sort of thing, newspapers which once idolized him suddenly began to question just, who this Frenchman really was. And so not only his health was in bad shape, but his reputation and his company. His company was in terrible shape. His company was now bankrupt.
He faced a trial when he got back to France, and was because of the huge debts that the company had accumulated in his absence. Although he was found not guilty of criminal intent, the ruling was that he would have to pay his debtors a small percentage of what was owed them. Now, a small percentage was still an enormous amount, particularly in those days. And for a long time, I think Heidsieck could be considered a broken man, but he was determined that he would find some way to get started again. However, he was really scratching, and the company was barely hanging on. But here's where we have the happy ending.
Yeah, believe it or not, there is a happy ending to this story, because on one very cold January day,
there was a knock at his door, and the messenger said, "There is a missionary in a small village near here who wants to see you urgently." This is the missionary, Reverend Raverdy, who came back and from time in Colorado. And when Heidsieck finally agreed to go see him, he immediately opened up a map in front of Heidsieck. And as Heidsieck's daughter recalled, with his fingers, he started walking across this map and saying, "This is yours. This plot belongs to you. I think we may have lost this one, but I think we can keep that one and this one." Heidsieck was stunned. He had no idea what was happening. But what was happening was that he was learning that the brother of the agent who had cheated him, this is
the good brother, right?
Yeah, the good brother, Thomas Bayot, had been appalled by his brother's action and said, "If ever I can pay Heidsieck back for what my brother did, I'm going to do it." And like Heidsieck, he was a man who wanted to do something on his own. And so he felt the call of the Wild West and went west to Denver and started mining a little bit, but mostly started businesses, and one business after another, and gradually began buying up land. When he died in an accident, it was discovered that he left all of this property to Charles Heidsieck, so that Charles Heidsieck ended up owning more than a third of the city, which was the fastest growing city in the West. That was Denver. This is Denver in 1859 or so. Yeah. But by then, the city had already begun to take off in 1871, and Heidsieck found himself to be once again a wealthy man, able to pay off his debts and restart his champagne company, the one we have today.
Yeah, and as this rather old cartoon shows, what I think the date is early 1900s or so.
Yeah.
Champagne just took off in America, and it was largely because of the example set by Charles Heidsieck, who realized the importance of putting a human face on the product that he was trying to sell. Up to then, most of the champagne houses had just merely been doing it from a distance, sending it off, having somebody somewhere, take care of all the details, but never really getting out in front and representing what was being sold. That was Heidsieck's legacy. He was the first head of a champagne house to actually get out there, take the risk, and do what was necessary. And as a result, today, I think the United States is the second biggest market in the world for champagne, right after Great Britain.
But in terms of volume, that is, in terms of price, America spends more money because America buys more of the more expensive varieties of champagne. So it remains a major import for the country, as well as a major business in France yet today.
So anyway, rather than blab on here, if somebody has any questions they'd like to throw out, no, are we?
Okay, I'm going to unmute everybody.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. No, I don't want to. Oh, allow part. Okay. This part of Zoom I have not really mastered. Okay, so everyone can unmute themselves as they see fit if they have questions.
I have a question.
Oh, there's Dan.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. It's fascinating. I was curious about the current Heidsieck company and the family's involvement, the heirs, and whether any of them live in the United States or perhaps even live in Denver, or is there any continuing relationship with the land in Denver?
There is a very tenuous, or I shouldn't say tenuous, distant relationship yet with Denver. Quite surprisingly, one of the younger generation, let me see, someone who would be, I guess, around 40 or 50 today, went to school in Denver, and at the time hadn't realized that this was that he was going to school in the place that was actually paying for his education. And yes, there are Heidsieck's in America. There are Heidsieck's probably everywhere. Charles-Camille Heidsieck had, I think, around 50 grandkids, and they have been a very productive family. So there are Heidsieck's everywhere, as I said, although none, as far as I know, have any connection with the company itself now. It was sold several years ago, first to Remy Cointreau, and now it has another ownership, I think something like EMI, I believe. Yeah.
But the family connection is nil. It's no longer there. There have been some family disputes, some things that, they say, well, it's too private to talk about, but now Champagne Charles Heidsieck is that in name only and has no relation to the family.
Did the family cooperate with you in writing the book?
Yeah, to an extent. We thought that this book would not be worth writing unless we could say something new. I mean, the story, the headline part of the whole story is well known, but we thought, the family has archives, has letters that have never been published before, and unless we can get our hooks onto them, this is not going to be worth doing. A good friend of the Heidsieck family convinced them to open up their archives to us, and so for 7 months we poured through the letters and went through all of that. We did hear, however, that one member of the family got really nervous when he heard that, these letters had gotten out. We've never allowed these things to happen. I'm going to sue. I'm going to take action. Well, nothing has happened so far, knock on wood. And, so, I mean, the Heidsieck's were helpful, but, there was this little burr there, and they demanded, send us back the letters. And, Anyway,
There's one in every family, right?
it seems to be, yeah. Yeah, it was a little unnerving.
Yeah, for sure. Nothing like a threatening legal letter, right?
Boy.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Don, I have a question because the focus of the book is obviously Charles, but his wife was Amelie was clearly sort of stuck running things back in France. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about Amelie's role and maybe just touch a little bit on, women have a strong presence in Champagne culture in general. So just kind of touch on women in Champagne and Amelie in particular.
Yeah, well, they do indeed. And, in the family, I mean, so much credit has to go to Amelie. She was the one that, had to deal with the books, worry about the money that was coming in, worry about her husband, who would be upset when he learned that the money was not coming in. We talk about Charles Heidsieck, putting a human face on all the business that he was conducting. But one of the things that we wanted to do in writing this book was to put a human face on everything that was going on. In other words, we didn't want to write a dry historical kind of book. We wanted to bring the personalities out. And, I think we were able to do that in part by talking about how Amelie, really propped up Charles during some really terrible times. We talk about the agonies that she went through when rumors started floating that Charles was seeing another woman. We talk about, Charles writing to her and complaining about, oh, you seem to think that, I'm just over here having a good time. I assure you, it's no bed of roses here, and I mean, the tensions were really, they were very real. And
so was the affection. One of the things we were really struck with in reading the letters was that we felt a bit like peeping toms at times, because the emotion from both of them was quite incredible. It was a marriage that was, I would say, if not arranged, at least it was very much encouraged because of the various Champagne relationships. But it obviously grew into the most loving and affectionate relationship that, it's hard to convey the intense feelings that came through in reading the letters. But as you point out, Terry, women are a major force in Champagne, and certainly Charles Heidsieck's mother as well was a major influence on him. She helped to arrange his whole career. She was very strong, but we have frequently said that it's quite natural. You find this strength of the women there because there were so many wars in Champagne that you ended up with a lot of widows, and hence you have women taking over in many of the houses and running them and managing them through generations.
Yeah.
No, oh, we have a question in the chat box, and the question is this the same Heidsieck this is from Bettina, is this the same Heidsieck that's celebrated in the Champagne song in the Fledermaus operetta?
Actually, yes, it is. And there are so many songs about him. Was a Heidsieck waltz that came out at about the same time in Vienna. I can't remember what else, but there were 3 or 4 other songs, and he was Champagne Charlie.
Okay, so now onto, do you have a favorite champagne, a favorite style of champagne, and what's your most memorable bottle of champagne?
We have a lot of favorite champagnes.
You can't, you don't need to be exclusive.
No, I mean, there's so many we like. I think if you had to drink just one, it would become very boring. I mean, certainly the main houses. One of our favorites, okay, is Bilkar Salmon.
Oh, good choice.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
But I don't know. We can tell you about a couple of memorable bottles because I
Yeah.
suppose everybody has them. One, you mentioned, Terry, the Wine and More and the Bernard de Nonancourt connection. Well, we were on a trip to Champagne and staying at a very nice hotel, and had dinner there and ordered a bottle of Laurent Perrier. And the sommelier said to us, well, there is this new one that you might like to try. And we said, sure. And they brought us a bottle of the Ultra Brut. This was what, 30 years ago or so, and
Yeah.
we weren't at all familiar with it. They were relatively new on the market. And
My palate is still stripped, still feeling dry and chapped from
and
it.
that's what we thought. Oh, wow, this is, we're not going to have any feeling left. So I don't know, we each drank a glass or so and left the rest, if you can believe that, and went up, decided, oh, after this lovely meal, we need a walk. And so we went out for a walk and we came back, and then I went upstairs to our room and got there and found that they had brought up the bottle of champagne, 2 glasses, put it in an ice bucket, and was waiting for us when we got back.
Which we poured down the drain immediately. But I got to tell you, our tastes have gravitated more in that direction.
We now love it.
Toward the much drier champagnes, the with less dosage, less sugar in them. We really have come to appreciate them, and especially the champagnes produced by the small growers, not just the big houses, but the small vignerons who used to just sell grapes to the big houses, but have now opted to start making their own styles of champagne. It's been a lot of fun. But got to tell you one other champagne that we
Before you do that, I have to say one more thing about Ultra Brut. It's also much lower in calories.
I didn't think champagne had calories at all. That's at least my
It
experience.
actually doesn't. No, that's
I
true.
really thought that the bubbles diffuse
Yeah,
calories.
pretty much. That's true. Yeah, that's the case.
One of our other favorite champagnes is Paul Roger, and we got to know a member of the family, Christian Paul Roger, very well. We were with a little tour group, and he invited us in, and it was a 1914 bottle of Paul Roger. It was a champagne that was made the first year of World War I. The grapes were harvested when they were still green because there was no time to lose. The Germans were coming in, and
bombs were falling.
Yeah, and people were getting killed in the vineyards. So the grapes were harvested, and they made champagne from that. And most people said, this champagne will never come around. The grapes are too green. They are too raw, too unripe. Paul Roger brought out, a basket full of bottles from the 1914 vintage and began pouring. And believe it or not, the wine was still alive. It was more than what?
It was 100 years old.
It was 100 years old.
Yeah.
You still had bubbles. You could almost count the number of bubbles coming up. So not a lot of life left, but still alive, and such a treat to taste. Talk about history in a bottle. That was it.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. Anything you like to pair your champagne with, a favorite pairing?
Good pizza.
Proving you can drink champagne with anything. Yes.
That's it. That's exactly it. And champagne is not just an aperitif, not something just to whet the appetite before dinner or lunch or anything. It's a wine that can be drunk throughout a whole meal. Again, there are different styles of champagne. Some are meant to be just, things to sip before dinner, but others to be drunk throughout the meal. And this was a lesson that was imparted to us by Krug Champagne once, who the Krugs put on a whole meal and proved that very point.
Ooh, that sounds exciting. Back to our friend Charles-Camille. Do you have a favorite story, or was there something? What was the most surprising thing that you learned about Champagne Charlie?
Well, for me, one of the most surprising things was from Perrier-Jouet. We had been hunting for a bunch of background information, and the archivist at Perrier-Jouet came up with something. He said, look, I found this in a drawer when I came into the office. It's been laying here for years. I have no idea, but it's a study that Perrier-Jouet commissioned several years ago because they'd had so much trouble trying to get into the American market. And they wanted to find out, why aren't we able to master the American market? And the answer they came up with was because we didn't have Charles Heidsieck. That he was out there, he was doing it, and we didn't have anybody like that who said, hey, I'm here, here's my champagne.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of the story is when he was in prison, how he did everything he could to survive, even to the point of becoming the best rock thrower when the alligators attacked, during moments of high tide or when there was a big storm. The alligators there with their jaws gaping wide open, and the prisoners actually deferred to Heidsieck. He was the best rock thrower.
Best fame.
He should have played baseball.
Yeah.
I rather was taken with all of his activities in prison. He even got so bored that he convinced the prison warden to allow him to cook for the other prisoners. Before that, everything was uncooked, everything was raw. It was served in a bucket, and Heidsieck, said, "Look, you folks may not make good bread in this country, but I can do better with the meat and some of the other raw vegetables that you're feeding us." So he took over the kitchen.
Yeah. Does anybody, I'm looking at our question, does anybody else have questions out there? Are we?
I did.
Good.
One of the interesting trips that my wife and I took one day was to visit a vineyard growing grapes naturally and processing them naturally. And I'm wondering, is there such a thing as natural champagne, from grapes grown without benefit of pesticides or other growing maneuvers that the chateaus may utilize?
There is a
Definitely.
growing movement of that. I think maybe Champagne was a little behind the other wine growing regions of France in that regard, but it is a very, very much a growing enterprise now. There are several bio champagnes or organic, and I think there are some biodynamic ones as well. They have more and more begun to look at the idea of terroir in Champagne, which is a relatively new concept since Champagne was and is based upon blending. But with, as Don said, many smaller owners of vineyards that were selling to the big houses now attempting to make their own, you're finding more and more of an interest in natural or organic type wines. They have also, I think, we saw recently, there are a few who have returned to plowing with horses, which is certainly a big thing in Burgundy and some in Bordeaux, because the soil has become so compacted through years of tractors and work of that sort. So some of them are going back to that use.
One of the companies that, one of the champagne houses that I think is the most interesting in terms of making natural champagne is Drapier.
Oh, yeah.
They produce a champagne called Drapier Nature, which
bottle.
has absolutely no sugar in it. You know, the champagnes that are sometimes labeled ultra brut or extra brut may have like 1 gram or 2 grams of residual sugar or syrup in them. Drapier has a champagne that has absolutely none. They also make a champagne that has no sulfites. You know, this is where you get into, you know, stuff that is really natural. None of the things that are normally added to champagne to stabilize it, totally absent in this particular cuvee that Drapier makes.
That was brought on because the Drapier father and son both turned out to be sulfite intolerant, and so they hunted for a way to make a champagne without having to use it. And I think they also have gone to some bio champagne, don't they, as well, an organic one as well. With
we like their champagnes a lot, but we didn't care for the no sulfite champagne. We felt like maybe it was a little unbalanced or unstable, whatever. It just didn't hit the spot.
Well, thank you very much.
In addition, as I said, you've written 2 great books, one on wine and war, and you've written also the one on champagne. For people who don't have a background in champagne, after we've exhausted your research, is there any book that you'd recommend, you know, for people wanting to learn more just about champagne in general, the whole process? Is there one that you particularly like?
Oh, well, we really like Euland's book, but that a man by the name of Richard Euland, a Swede, but it's written in English. He has done one that's what, 5,000 champagnes, is that?
Yeah.
And there are more than 5,000 champagnes made.
He's written 3 books. The first one was 5,000 champagnes, and the next edition was 10,000.
Oh, okay.
And I think he's now up to 15,000. So
yeah.
So that's a really good that's a good book. It's exhaustive. I mean, he's tasted every champagne that exists, I think.
Yeah, trying to think, what else
What about the book that was written by a guy that I wanted to interview, and I called a contact in London. I said, how can I get a hold of Forbes?
Patrick Forbes.
Patrick Forbes.
Is
okay,
yeah,
that's a classic.
Yeah. Champagne, the land, the people, the wine.
Yeah, that it's a little bit out of date, but it's got excellent history and
good profiles of the major houses.
Yeah. But the bottom line to that, though, was when I called our good friend in London to say, how can I get a hold of Mr. Forbes? He says, well, you know, it's going to be difficult. He died several years ago, so you know.
What was that? I'm putting this in the chat box. Champagne, the land,
the people, the wines. I think Patrick Forbes is the author.
Yeah.
It's a really good book for basic champagne stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the land, the people,
the wines.
You know, I had one other question, if I can jump in. Is it possible to buy a very good bottle of champagne for $30?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
I would think so. Golly, you know, we're a little out of touch on pricing in America, particularly in the past few months, how that may have changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we wouldn't. I mean, price does count. Price is indicative. I wouldn't spend less than 20 euros for a bottle of champagne here. So
Which-
translate that into dollars and,
Sure.
It's about 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and-
Today's rate.
But you're saying price, as the price goes up, the quality goes.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
Which,
in general, yeah.
I mean, champagne is the toughest wine to make. It's also the most expensive wine to make. So, you know, as prices go up, especially as, well, if there's a champagne shortage, which they're
Yeah.
talking about,
Then
prices inevitably will rise.
Mhm.
But yeah, you should be able to find a really good champagne, a well-made champagne for that. And I think we both feel that if you get the basic champagne from a house, you're going to find that it's from one of the major houses. It's going to be well made. It's going to be delicious. It may not be to your taste, but it's going to be definitely a wine worth buying. And it also is indicative of the style of the house, so that if you want to spend more at some point, you know whether you like that one or not.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any more questions? Any going once? Going twice? I mean, I could talk about champagne all afternoon, but I could drink champagne all afternoon, but anyway, if no one has any more questions, just a little bit of housekeeping, just to remind everyone that there are a couple events coming up. Tomorrow, the Exploring the Moons of Jupiter via Zoom, the Rendezvous de Cinéphile at 10 o'clock.